Did you know that the first woman to receive a PhD was the Italian woman Elena Cornaro? She received her degree from the University of Padua in 1678 after successfully explaining two random passages from Aristotle. Welcome to the Scholarly Sisterhood podcast, a podcast that is building a stronger and more inclusive scholarly community for women around the world. This podcast is a platform for female scholars to share their story, and my hope is that from these stories, we can create a more supportive community for women navigating the academic world. I'm your host, Anna Blankenship, and I'm glad you're here. Today, we're going to learn the story of Mary Ann Bodine Al-Sharif, affectionately known by those around her as Dr. Bass, an assistant professor of higher education administration at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. So without further ado, let's go meet today's scholarly sister. I am just so excited that we have you on this podcast today, Mary Ann. Let's start with, who are you and what is your, currently, where are you? What are you doing?
Sure. So Mary Ann Bodine Al-Sharif, my students call me Mary Ann or Dr. Bass, and I am an assistant professor of higher ed administration here at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, and I'm also the program coordinator. I'm a faculty of one, but I guess if you ask me who I am or what I do, my research is focused in identity development. I do a lot of work at looking at marginalized and minoritized identities in higher ed and what it's like to be at the intersections of those marginalized spaces with the power structure that higher ed is and how that impacts students. And I also do a lot of work in comparative and in international higher ed. I have a sweet spot for Saudi Arabia. My dissertation was on the development of higher ed in Saudi Arabia and how students from Saudi studying in the United States, how their concept of national identity changes, moving from a collective identity space to an individualized identity space here in the US. And so that's who I am. That's what I do. Love it.
Wow. I feel like there's a lot to unpack there. I feel you must not get bored often.
No, I love the work I do. Well, I think some people think I'm a workaholic, but I really do love, like, if you ask me what my passion is or what my hobby is, I would say it's research. I truly am a researcher. I love the work that I do. You know, I'm first generation college student, so I'm the first in my family to go on and complete a bachelor's degree and then to move on and finish out through a PhD. And there's something about I fell in love with learning at the community college and continued on. So it makes a difference for me.
So tell us that story. How did you, first get into education?
Sure. Oh, gosh. As I was raised in the back hills of Missouri, I'll start there. In the way back hills of Missouri, we often lived in farmhouses and out in the country. I remember being 17 and still not having running water or having to use an outhouse, right? Like, so that's the space that I came from. My senior year of high school, I had a car accident. I broke my back. I ended up in pretty bad space. Didn't think that I was going to go on to college. College was in the periphery, but it was something that I knew that my family couldn't afford. And so it wasn't something I'd thought about in that way, but a high school counselor and my high school principal drove out to our farmhouse in the middle of nowhere and said, hey, there's this thing called vocational rehabilitation. And I think, if you can get yourself well enough to go, that we could probably get you some funding to get you started at the local community college. So I literally started at the local community college, coming in and out of a wheelchair, learning to walk again. I was pretty banged up. I had some major body cast going on. I was looking great my freshman year, to say the least. But that was really my first time, knowing that I could do something bigger. And so I started there at the community college. I finished a degree in general studies because I really wasn't sure what I was going to do. My parents were very conservative. And so when I finished, I was like, I want to do more. My parents were comfortable with a religious institution, so I ended up transferring to Oklahoma, where I went to Randall University and I finished a bachelor's degree there in religion. Did some travel abroad, first started getting really connected to international students in that experience. First time to leave the country, first time to fly in a plane, first of many things as every first generation student goes through. But I fell in love with working with international students. I fell in love with being in international spaces. And starting to recognize that there were other worldviews besides the American worldview, besides my worldview. And so that really opened me up to really rethinking what it is I'm doing and where I want to go and what that looks like. So eventually down the road, I did a little time teaching in the public schools. I went on to get a master's degree in English with an emphasis in teaching English as a second language. So I lived in Oklahoma City at that time, and I thought, wow, I could start working in an English institute connected to a university. And then this little thing called 9/11 occurred, and most of our English institutes closed. And I was like, great, I have this degree and I don't know what to do with it. My friend was like, you can teach in the public schools. And so I was alternatively certified, started teaching in the public schools. Couldn't get a job. I speak about 5 languages, but I don't speak Spanish. And the public schools wanted someone who spoke Spanish so they could also serve as a translator. And so actually had a difficult time finding a job after getting certification to teach in the public schools. But there was a principal in Oklahoma City who took pity on me, and he said, look, I have a 1-year grant funded position, and I'm happy to offer it to you if you're willing to coach cheer. I do not know anything about cheer, but I needed a job, and I said yes.
So how did you learn how to teach cheer?
I ended up going on YouTube. I'm not kidding. Going on YouTube, looking around, talking to other people in the district who did cheer, failing many, many times, and then learning again. And so my girls were great, though. They won a state championship. I will say that those girls are far more talented than I ever was. So really, it was more my girls leading me than anything else. But it was a job, and it was a foot in the door.
Crazy.
And
also, I have to ask, I'm sorry to interrupt. What 5 languages do you know?
I speak German fluently, French fairly fluently. Living with a husband who's Arab and from Saudi Arabia, I speak Arabic. I've picked that up, and then I've worked on some Farsi because at one point while going through school, I worked with a building company that was Iranian. And so I traded lessons in Farsi for lessons in English for the guy who owned the company. And then English, of course, which that might be the one I speak the least well. We'll say it like that. But yeah.
Oh,
so
I love it.
Yeah. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah. All right. So what happened after, so you started teaching cheer, you got this job, then
I got the job. Then I started looking at our graduation rates, and inner city public school, 85% free and reduced lunch, large Hispanic, Latino, Latinx population. And I was devastated that, first of all, so few were graduating. And even more so that so few were going on to college. And I started looking at those numbers, and this is driving me crazy. Like I had no idea. And being raised on a farm, everything's an experience. And so I started talking to the counselor about it, and I kept going back and talking to the counselor about it. And she was like, Mary Ann, you need to get a job at the community college or something. You really are concerned about, first generation students and college access. And she was like, that'd be a great space for you, because my contract was coming to an end, right? My grant funded position was almost over, and I had never even thought about it, and I didn't know what it meant to be first gen at that time. And so I was like, okay. So I applied. The local community college had like 2 or 3 positions for an academic advisor open, and so I applied. And I interviewed, and why they hired me, I don't know, but they did. And that was my first real job in higher ed, was at the local community college. And what a great space for me to be in, having been, a graduate of community college and having started with really no real clue what I was doing in life. But it was an amazing opportunity, and I fell in love again with working with international students, and I got to sponsor a club, and I got to do a lot of things. And my supervisor, about 6 months in, gave me the opportunity to serve as the interim assistant director. And then she said, "Hey, did you know there's a degree in this?" And I was like, "A degree in what?" And she was like, "Student affairs, higher ed. It's a field, you can actually study this." And they did tuition reimbursement at the community college, and so connected me to the local university, and I applied. The program was in moratorium. Talking about bad starts to everything. The program was in moratorium, but they were still teaching a few classes. They were willing to take me as a non-degree seeking student. And I took a few classes, and I absolutely loved it. And then I was impatient. I was like, "So is this going to stay in moratorium? When are we going to come out of moratorium?" And they're like, "We're hiring right now." And they did. They hired 3 faculty, restarted the program. And the most amazing woman in the world was hired in that group. And her name was Penny Pasquet. And she's one of the leading qualitative researchers in higher ed right now. And I just by happenstance was assigned to her as my chair and my advisor through the program. And I think it was truthfully her having the same vision that I now have for my students, but the same vision that she had then, was really looking at first generation marginalized students, what that looked like, how their identities develop, and seeing something in me, heaven knows what. But I got into the doctoral program and finished my PhD, and again did some traveling, and moved up in my position at work, and then eventually moved to another state while I was still in my doctoral program. Got a director's position in southeastern Missouri, or excuse me, not southeastern Missouri, I apologize, northwestern Missouri. And this is my first director's role. And then from there, quickly recruited down to Florida at a large multi-campus institution with like 52,000 students. It was huge at that time. And so I really had this opportunity to move around at the same time I was working on my doctoral degree, and finally finished, and started looking for. I didn't even know that I really wanted to be faculty really towards the end of my degree. And I was like, I can teach this. I can make a difference. Like I can help others that have come from where I'm at to do what I'm doing, to do this themselves. And then I was fortunate. I graduated. It took me about a year to get a faculty position at all, and I ended up doing a visiting assistant professor's position at Texas Tech University in West Texas, out in the desert, like 5 hours from everything.
Wow.
But things like that don't bother me because I'm from out in the middle of nowhere. And so I was there for about a year and a half, and started applying. It took a lot of applications to finally get a tenure position. Tenure positions are hard to get, but I ended up here at the University of Alabama in Birmingham. They didn't have a higher ed program, and they had advertised this position. They were looking for someone to start the program in higher ed administration with the Social Justice Foundation. And I was like, "Could you speak my language any louder?" And so I applied for this one, and thankfully got the job. And it was amazing. So I built this program, and you never build anything by yourself. Let me say that. So, I say I a lot, and I want to make sure that you all know that there's a we in there, because no one gets anywhere on their own. And I think for women in higher ed, that is especially true. You get a lot of hand ups, but not handouts. And I hope to give a lot of hand ups to the next generation behind me. But this position, I had no idea coming in. I knew that there were other programs in the state, but I didn't realize I would be the 5th program. So this is a pretty competitive state to be opening a 5th program in higher ed. But it was the caveat that we were focused in social justice, and really looking at theory, and not so much focused. We still have a policy focused, but not as much as we have that social justice focus and changing policy for that purpose. And so we've been quite successful. I'll say I'm starting my fourth cohort now. We've run about 60 students through the program.
Wow.
For a new program and a faculty of one. I think that's amazing. Some long hours and some long nights, I will say that, because I do everything. I'm the recruiter, I do the admissions process, teach the classes. I have 3 adjuncts now. I started with no adjuncts. I've had semesters where I've taught 5 to 7 courses at the grad level, and now 3. We're a 3-3 load, so kind of wedged down. I'm in my just finished my 4th year, starting my 5th year, and I just put in my tenure pack. I'm going up early for tenure this year. So yeah, I'm so excited about that. But none of this happened on its own. Like, I have had great opportunities given to me, great networking across this campus, nationally, being connected to national networks through national organizations, ASH, ACPA, NASPA.
Well, tell us more about that. So I want to get more into this, because you're bringing up, I think, a great point of we don't get anywhere alone. So tell us some more about those organizations.
Yeah, so I would say ACPA was the first time I had ever gone to any type of higher ed organization, and ACPA is it's student affairs focused, but such wonderful work in identity development and support for students, marginalized, minoritized identities, and so much more. I'm barely scratching the surface of what they actually do, but I fell in love. Like, that's my home. If somebody asks me what your home organization is, that's my home organization, because I was able to get a lot of development through service there on different committees and subcommittees and spaces, running for offices and different things. I do the commission for the global dimensions of student development, of course, was a home for me with international work, study abroad, and the like. To be a matter of fact, I just work with a group of international students from across the US studying, who are also from across the globe, right? And we did a new directions volume we're getting ready to submit on what it's like to be an international graduate student studying higher ed in the United States, and what those experiences look like in the workforce. So I think a lot of it is building your network, and those national organizations really make a difference. ASH, the Association for the Study of Higher Ed, is an amazing organization. When I was in grad school, I had the opportunity to work with IASIS in their founding years. They weren't even completely established. They're an online global international student affairs association. And what I love about them is that you can be anywhere. When we finally got it founded, the founding fathers, I'll say it like that, the larger group, I was just a grad student at that time, but we ended up putting it in Belgium, and it's still there today. And I did the first research project, teamwork. We had a research team, a huge team. Trisha Seifried and a few others. Trisha in particular is very special to me in that. But that was my first big global research project, was through that. So I think sometimes women in particular don't realize their potential, or that there are spaces out there that they can grab onto and do bigger things. And for me, it was, I don't think I ever questioned whether I could. I was just looking, is there something I can do? Where can I connect at? And I think sometimes, now that I'm on the other side as faculty, I see a lot of my students kind of limit themselves because they think, I can't do that, or I don't have the resources to do that. And I would argue that sometimes resources are hard to get, but the resources are out there, and many times they start with that network. So, if you want me to give advice to women in higher ed anywhere, in anything, my first advice would be connect with your network, figure out who your people are, who's your tribe in your field, and stick close to those connections, because the work in IASIS, the work in ACPA, the work in ASH, has helped me to connect globally, not just locally or nationally, but globally. And there's no amount of money you can pay to do that, right? It's free. And so those are connections you want to hold on to. And then working at different institutions across I worked at 7 institutions. So at all different levels, private, public, community college, 4-year research. And I have a network from those spaces, and those individuals have moved on to other institutions, but because we're still in contact with each other, that network just keeps getting bigger because, oh, I'm working with so-and-so now, I'm at this institution, let me introduce you. And all of a sudden I have another research partner. And so, yeah, networking, I think it's the best resource, and it's free. Doesn't cost anything to get to know someone and to share with them what you're doing or what your interests are.
All right, so networking. I feel like sometimes we throw this term around and it seems like it can be very forced or very, what would be, I guess, a good step or a different way to think about this networking term that might not be so artificial, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Well, first, let me say, make it intentional. I mean, I'm networked with a lot of people, but I don't use all those resources, right? I use the ones that are purposeful for me, that are going to help me advance in research, or if I'm working on a big project that I need guidance on, or if I'm looking for a big project to do some research with, I reach out to the network, but it has to be intentional. So look for people who are just as invested in you. And I would also say there's some responsibility in there, right? If I'm reaching out to my network and I'm always taking from them, but I'm never giving, that's problematic, because they're going to need help too. And so anytime someone that I'm connected with and we've done some things together, they reach out to me for help, I recognize that I need to create space for them as well. So there's some dual responsibility there. You're helping them, they're helping you. Make sure it's a two-way communication. And look for people who challenge you as well. Don't always go for low-hanging fruit. You need to be challenged in your work, otherwise you're not growing. And so find people who can challenge you. You don't always have to be the lead. I'm very happy sometimes being on the back end and having the opportunity to sit back and be guided and taught by those who are leading, so that later I can lead a project. But it has to be intentional. So let me say that. And if you're not sure where to begin, look to who's your mentor, and talk to them about how to get networked, and who's in their network and how they selected it. I think hats off to Penny Pasquay. I can't say her name enough. She's an amazing individual, but she used to take us around as graduate students at conferences, and she said, let me introduce you. I think this person up here might be someone of interest to you. I remember the first time she introduced me to Kristen Wren, who I only knew from books that I had read. And I was like, she's really here. I felt like a fangirl at a rock concert. I'll be honest with you.
So for people who don't know who Kristen Wren is, who is Kristen Wren?
She does some of the most amazing work in identity development theory. She does a lot of work in first-year experience, looking at marginalized identities, LGBTQ, race, ethnic, individuals with diverse identities, in that sense. She is the it woman in this space for me, based on some of the research that she does that aligns with mine. And so, yeah, she's just awesome.
Yeah, it sounds like everything you just listed is what you do.
It's everything that I do. And I was inspired from one of her first books that she did. And so I remember being introduced, and it was like, Penny was like, hey, this is Kristen. And she was, up in Michigan State University. And you're familiar with her work, right? And I, of course I did. I felt like some fangirl at a rock concert meeting the lead singer for the first time. It was awesome. But then, being able to follow her work and then to see what she does and how she's connecting. And so, a lot of this, you can see how people connect by looking at their research. Who are they writing with? What are they writing about? Who's my resource to call out to? Who do I know that knows that person that could help connect me? And then vice versa. How can I connect my friend who's looking for something in this area? If I know somebody, I always speak up and say, hey, you might check with, or look down the hallway too. Right now, it's kind of come full circle for me because I'm doing this with my students right now. And so I'm recognizing that trajectory of what this can mean for those students. So as a faculty, you want to make sure you're making those steps for your students. You want to make sure that you're creating pathways for them. And women help women in that way, or they should if they're not. And so especially when I think about my program is over 65% marginalized minoritized identities. I want to make a pathway. I know the statistics. I know that we need to create space. And so it's a more than a responsibility to me at this point. It's a duty. Like I feel the urgency in that advocacy to get that done. And I want my students, when they get on the other side, to feel the urgency and the advocacy to get that done as well.
I love that. And I think that goes along with something I love that you say is it's a hand up, not a handout.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If you're helping one person, you're helping everyone. So I can't reach the world, but I can reach the person standing next to me, and I can make sure that the door is open in that way. Yeah, definitely.
I love that. All right. So what are some challenges that you've come across as a woman in higher education, and how have you overcome them?
Oh gosh, so many. Well, my identity, let's start with that, because you don't do identity research unless you're also looking at what is your own identity and where are you going in life. I am a Muslim American woman, and I was hijabi for about 15 years. And one of my biggest challenges was getting a job as a faculty member. And some of the experiences that I had in interview processes, 64 interviews to get to the job that I'm in a year and a half. And my husband finally said, take off the hijab, and I think that you'll get a space. And, I'm a white woman who identifies as Muslim. And so Islam is a non-normative white religion, right? And so sometimes as a white woman, that experience looks different than my peers who identify in different identities in terms of race and ethnicity. And so it kind of puts you in this in-between space. So you're not quite Arab enough to be seen as a true Muslim in some spaces. And that's on both sides, from the white American perspective and also from the Arab world, right? And so you live in that space. I'll just speak truth to that because I've experienced that in both ways. And then you're not quite American enough. Your nationality is questioned. And so we think that there are women who are hijabi. We see women who are hijabi in STEM fields all the time in faculty roles. And I would argue that that is true in STEM fields. But when you cross over to that other side, sometimes it can be seen differently. And I really think it has to do a lot with the field of higher ed. And there's not many of us. Now, I know several who are coming up behind me, and I'm really excited about that for them. But I also know the road they're going to have to hold to get to that space. And so I remember I had 4 interviews left, and my husband, who's Saudi, says, take off the hijab and let's see what happens. And I presented the same presentation, the same research. The only thing that changed was the way I looked. And at that point, I had 4 offers within 2 weeks of doing those interviews. And I chose, amazingly, the University of Alabama at Birmingham, because during the on-campus interview, I always out myself in my letter of application saying, hey, as an American Muslim woman in the United States, my research is focused on, just a nice way to kind of slide it in there. So if you really don't want me, you won't move any further. And you kind of learn those tricks after a while. But I remember when I arrived, the person who picked me up at the airport to bring me to the hotel and that, he was so sweet. And he says, let me take you around Birmingham and show you what's here. And did you know we have about 4 or 5 different mosques, and here's where they're located. Just want you to know, if you move here, there's a community here already. And I was shocked, floored, actually. I'll be quite honest with you. Because that had not been the experience in other spaces. Now, I wasn't hijabi, but the fact that they had the forethought, the first out of 64 institutions to have that forethought, was really huge for me. And so that is truthfully why I chose the position I'm in right now. And so it wasn't the highest paying position, wasn't the lowest paying position, but it was a position that at least I could feel some inclusivity in the space that I'm in. Now, there have been challenges. There's challenges being a faculty of one, with a lot of students and a lot of grading and a lot of requirements. There's challenges of disagreement, of people not understanding. I always tell people I'm more likely to be higher ed-splained than anybody else on campus.
Which
and
is
I'm okay
funny
with,
because that's exactly that's what you do.
well, you know what it usually is that, they're arguing for something, and I'm like, well, the research tells us, and in my own personal experience as an administrator, and then the response back is, but that's not how we do it here. Higher ed here looks differently. And I'm like, okay, I don't think it does. I think we're all under the same accrediting format across the nation to some degree. So, but I mean, it's okay. To me, those are minor challenges compared to bigger things that I have seen. Trying to just fight to get in a space. And that's true for women. And when you think about faculty positions across the nation, women are the minority. It's predominantly male, and it's hard for women to get in spaces. And so I think for me, it was kind of a wake-up call and a recognition of, I took hijab off, and so I pass, but you can't take your skin off. You can't take the way you look off. And so for our marginalized, minoritized women trying to get into faculty roles, administrative roles, leadership roles across the nation, across the globe, those are things that they can't change. And so I recognize there's some privilege in that statement. Yeah, it sucked. But I have a lot of privilege. And so again, that's another reason why I need to be creating spaces for others, pathways to move forward. And I think sometimes we take our privilege for granted until you've gone without it. And then you recognize, you have a whole lot more than you think you do. And you better be responsible with that privilege that you have. So women need to build women, not tear women down.
100%. Well, thank you so much for sharing that story. And I'm just so grateful that you are in this space and just so gung-ho about creating those pathways and just for the next generation. And I love that you're at a point where, you can see in your students, and you said that you can see that, there are already some women that are starting on that path. And I'm glad that they have you to look up to and to give them a hand up.
Yeah. But it's not, I'm not doing anything special. Let me say that. I'm not doing anything special. I'm doing things that everybody can do. And I think that's it's shifting our worldview, our perspective on how we think about others. So there's nothing special going on over here, other than just being cognizant of who's in the room and recognizing the role that you play. And I think we miss out on great opportunities and on great people when we're not paying attention.
Yeah, let's make this the norm.
Exactly. This should be the norm. Yeah, I'll agree.
Yeah. All right. So what advice would you give? And you've already given a little bit, but I want to hear more because you got good advice. So what advice would you give to young aspiring women who want to be leaders in the education field?
I think you need to come in with eyes wide open, right? Recognize the challenges that are already there, the systemic issues that exist, and look for your network. I can't say enough about finding your network. Who's your support? Who's your family, if you will, at the position that you're getting into, or the role that you're wanting to play. But you're going to have some tenacity, and you're going to have to be able to bite that bottom lip sometimes. Recognize where there's spaces for advocacy for yourself and for others, and know that you might have to put in some extra hours. But you will get there. You can't give up on that space. And I think many times women, in particular in leadership and faculty roles, exhaustion catches you. So self-care. You've got to make time for yourself and your family. I love what I do. My family, my kids, my husband, he'll tell you, I could 24 hours, I could stay right at this desk and type away. I love being here. I love working with students, but I have to make some priorities outside of work. And so keep it balanced. Know what your weaknesses are, so that you can address things appropriately. I know for me, obviously I have a mouth on me, right? I always want to speak and say, no, wait a minute, let's talk about that. Let's unpack that. And it's not always a great time to do that. And so I've had to learn to tame my tongue a little bit in spaces, because I won't say being completely quiet, but learning to pause and then speak later when I have a bigger opportunity to make a difference has become a toolbox go-to for me, but it didn't get there easily. And I still mess that up sometimes, but forgive yourself. I think that's the other thing. Like, when you do screw up, just forgive yourself. Say, okay, I messed that up. Apologize to the people I need to apologize to, and do better. And if you've apologized and you've made amends and others can't handle that, you did what you needed to do, but you forgive yourself and you keep going, and be okay with making mistakes. I make more mistakes in a day than I do right. But those mistakes are teaching tools for me. I've learned some type of lesson from that. So be comfortable with being wrong. Because if you're wrong long enough, you'll get it right.
Ooh, I like that last one. It's hard. I not like it because it's easy. But I need to be reminded that.
Yeah, it's okay.
Oh, that's good. What legacy do you want to leave behind?
I always say advocacy when someone says, what do you hope you leave behind? I hope I can leave a trail of advocacy so that I'm not the only one doing the work, so to speak. Because if I'm the only one doing it, then not enough's getting done. So I hope that other women will start empowering other women, and helping to move people up, and out into bigger spaces. I'm never upset if a student moves on and outdoes me. I hope they do, because I get to own a little bit of that legacy, knowing where they came from. I'm part of that academic family tree, right? And I think that is the piece I want to leave behind, is that advocacy, seeing others doing more and doing it differently. We're going to have to be innovative in this future world that we're moving into. And so if we can all advocate to do better, then I feel like that'll get us there.
I love that. Oh, so much. Well, I have one last question for you, and that is, who do you know that I should interview next?
Oh, I have a wonderful woman I just met who is in Saudi Arabia, and I'm not going to say her name, but I'm just going to say that she is a future leader in higher ed. I applied for a Fulbright, and she is a part of my partner institution for that Fulbright. We'll see if I get it or I don't get it. Who knows? Maybe I will, maybe I won't. It doesn't matter if I do or I don't at this point. She's the golden star that came out of the alignment, right? And she's working in Saudi, which is a developing higher ed system. She's over a medical education program, and she's doing some amazing things, but she's truly a pioneer in that space. And she's a qualitative researcher, which, just makes my heart sing. And I just think that when you think about we live in the Western world, right? Everything has already been developed. We're growing and we're advancing, but she's in a developing higher ed program, a developing higher ed system where not everything has been well framed, and she's creating things that we take for granted every day. So I think she would be an amazing woman to speak with, and I would bet that she probably doesn't see herself as someone doing great and amazing things, but oh my gosh, the things that she's doing in the space that she's in is huge. So I would love to connect you with her.
Oh, well, I am so excited. Well, Mary Ann, Dr. Bass, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I'm just so glad to know you. So thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Mary Ann Bodine Al-Sharif's episode of The Scholarly Sisterhood. Check out the episode description to learn more about Mary Ann and her work. This episode was researched and hosted by Anna Blankenship. And as always, we thank our editor, Lizzie Walker, and staff writer, Emily Sanders. Hey, can you do me a favor? Can you share this episode of The Scholarly Sisterhood with a woman in academia you know? Subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode filled with stories, insights, and expertise from remarkable female scholars from around the world. My biggest takeaway from Mary Ann's episode is to give a hand up, not a handout. This idea of bringing those around you up with you. It can be overwhelming to think about the whole world, but we can help the person standing next to us. Thank you, Mary Ann, for sharing your story with us.